Hello everyone, bringing you a video today looking at some Royal Navy insignia. I haven't made a video looking at any Royal Navy kit or uniform for a little while now, and I thought it was about time that I made another video looking at something from the Royal Navy. And what we're looking at in this video are what are officially referred to as shoulder badges, and these are rank slides or epaulettes as they're often referred to for ratings in the Royal Navy, and they were introduced initially for use on foul weather clothing in the 1970s, and then their use was extended in certain instances, and we're going to talk about that in some detail in the video now. So here we have the shoulder badges we're going to talk about in this video. The top row are a set of blue on white printed rating shoulder badges from leading rate on the left through petty officer to chief petty officer on the right, and then beneath that we have a set of woven rayon shoulder badges for a fleet chief petty officer, and we're going to talk about all of these in a bit more detail. The need for the printed set of shoulder badges which we have along the top came about due to the introduction of new foul weather clothing into the Royal Navy in the 1970s. So around 1970 this set of badges were introduced alongside new foul weather clothing which included epaulettes, and this is the Mark II foul weather smock and trousers. We've looked at the Mark III on the channel previously, which is very similar but closes with touch and close or velcro fastenings down the front as opposed to the buttons which were used on the Mark II. The shoulder badges were necessitated by the fact you couldn't see a ratings arm badges when they're wearing foul weather clothing, and these were actually introduced as a loan item. The foul weather clothing itself was loaned out, it wasn't individual issue, and the shoulder badges as well were loaned out as required, or at least that was the intention. So you have the leading rates badges here. See at the back here we have the NATO stock number on each of these. They're very simple in terms of construction, printed and then stitched over at the end, and then the back they're just stitched together at each end as well. As you can see, they're not stitched together in the middle. So that's the leading rates badges there. As I say, introduced around 1970, and these were only worn on foul weather clothing. They weren't worn for any other purpose. They weren't worn on any other uniform, at least not officially. They weren't supposed to be. In the centre we have the petty officers badges, of course using the existing badge for these two rates, the fouled anchor for a leading rate and then the crossed fouled anchors surmounted by the crown for the petty officer. And these have been worn as arm badges for many, many years to denote rate. You can see these are constructed in exactly the same manner. They're not wholly stitched over at the back, so very simple to produce. For the chief petty officers at this time didn't have an arm badge. They had worn an arm badge in the Victorian era, but that had then been deleted, and by this point chief petty officers were denoted by their cap badge and the wearing of 3 buttons on each cuff of the jacket. Now of course in foul weather clothing the buttons would be covered up if you were wearing it over the fore and aft rig, and if you were not wearing a cap there would be no way of denoting rate at all. So the cap badge was taken as the basis for the rank badge, or the rate badge rather, to be used on the shoulder badges. And we have that here, as you can see, the laurel, the anchor in the centre surrounded by a rope with the crown above. This is basically the chief petty officer's cap badge in outline, printed onto these to form the shoulder badge. On the back of these we have, I'll turn these over here, I think that's the right way up, there we go. Put them this way around as well for ease of illustration. The details are all presented on the back here. We have the manufacturer there, Listerrock, you've got the contract number underneath that, and obviously the NATO stock number above the manufacturer's name. And the number at the very top is the vocab number, and this is the original vocab number here. I have a little inspection stamp here which I'll just point out. This is the original vocab number which refers to these as being loan items to be loaned out with foul weather clothing. We have a further vocab number here which is 33055, and this came about, this was introduced in 1976 when the Jersey heavy wool was introduced for ratings basically the same as that worn by the Army, the Jersey heavy wool with reinforcement at the elbows and touch and close fastened epaulettes on the shoulder reinforcement. The Navy introduced basically exactly the same pattern in navy blue. And at this time, chief petty officers were permitted to wear this design of shoulder badge on the epaulettes of the Jersey heavy wool as well. And for that purpose, they became individual issue for chief petty officers only. These badges remained for petty officers and leading rates, foul weather clothing only. And initially, leading rates and petty officers had to sew, to display their rate, they had to sew a red embroidered badge onto the arm per their square rig uniform or fore and aft rig. Chief petty officers could use the shoulder badges. As they didn't have any badge to be worn on the arm, these were then transferred over to being individual issue. They were also available as loan clothing for wear on foul weather smocks as well, of course, which remained loan only, but sets of these would be issued for use on the Jersey Heavy Wool, which were individual issue. So the use of these shoulder badges changed partway through the 1970s. The Fleet Chief Petty Officer is a rate which actually emerged during the course of the 1970s. It was first noted that it was going to be introduced in 1970, and that the initial board for promotion to Fleet Chief Petty Officer would be held early in 1971. So that gives you the sort of time frame of the introduction of the rate. It was actually a Warrant Officer grade equivalent to Warrant Officer Class 1, and the badge is the same as that for Warrant Officers Class 1 in other services, with the Royal Coat of Arms, as you can see here. These shoulder badges are first mentioned in 1976 with the introduction of the Jersey Heavy Wool, and they were intended for wear on the Jersey Heavy Wool. The instructions for the introduction of the rate into the Royal Navy mentions printed blue on white shoulder badges for wear on foul weather clothing, but I've never seen any examples of those, and I unfortunately don't have any. I'm not sure they existed, but I'd be interested to know if anyone who served at the time can remember. It's not the kind of detail you necessarily pay any attention to, but someone might know. But these woven gold on black rayon shoulder badges were introduced alongside the Jersey Heavy Wool to show a Fleet Chief Petty Officer's rate on the shoulder. They are more similar to the officers' shoulder badges used at the time. You have press studs at the back here. So this forms the section that goes over the epaulette on the Jersey Heavy Wool. And you can see here you have the NATO stock number and the vocab number printed in white there as well. The woven section of the badge is actually a separate piece stitched onto the back section, so you can see the seam of that there, if it'll come into focus. There we go. You can see this is stitched on separately, and the badge itself is woven gold rayon on black, as you can see there. So that's the Fleet Chief Petty Officer's badge. And these, I believe, were relegated to wear on foul weather clothing with the introduction of a full colour Fleet Chief Petty Officer's shoulder badge in the early 1980s. But again, I'd be interested to hear any further information on that people can provide. The information I have is a little bit patchy. So that's a set of Fleet Chief Petty Officer's rate badges there, as I say, equivalent to Warrant Officer Class 1, and introduced in the 1970s because there were posts filled by Chief Petty Officers which really warranted a higher grade of rating, so the rate of Fleet Chief Petty Officer was created for that reason. So we've not only had a look at the badges here, we've also talked a little bit about the rating system in the Royal Navy and the changes which occurred in the 1970s. I hope it's been good talking about some Royal Navy military and history for a change. I've certainly enjoyed digging these out again, and I'm considering potentially putting on a Royal Navy display at a future event, perhaps at Hack Green or somewhere like that. Certainly been quite good digging these out, been inspirational about thoughts about how I could display some of the Royal Navy kit and uniform going forward. So hopefully it's been good looking at this stuff as well. So I hope you found it interesting looking at these. Collecting badges insignia is quite interesting, particularly the Royal Navy obviously have a huge range of both substantive and non-substantive rate badges. So collecting Royal Navy insignia is one thing I've enjoyed doing over the years, just picking up badges here and there. And it's nice to make a video talking about these shoulder badges, as they're officially referred to. Of course, rank slides or epaulettes is the more common term for these. I'll make some future videos looking at the development of these, perhaps the next pattern along, and that sort of really ends my era of collecting, I suppose you could say. There's a further pattern of shoulder badges introduced prior to the end of the Cold War, as I mentioned in the video, and we'll probably have a look at those in a future video going forward as well. If you found this interesting and you'd like to see more from the channel, please do consider subscribing if you haven't already. And whether you're newly subscribing or you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell, the notification button down below. That will of course alert you when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and you would like to support the channel, you can. Both Patreon and PayPal are linked down below. And as ever, a huge thank you to everybody who supports the channel using those two methods. It's greatly appreciated, as I always say. Thank you all very much indeed. If you'd like to follow the channel on social media, you can. Facebook, Instagram and Twitter are all linked down below. And if you'd like to get in touch but you don't really use social media, there is of course an email address in the description as well. That's everything for this video, so until next time, bye for now.